Are you a member of the casual gaming proletariat? Congratulations. Together we will seize the means of site reinforcement and destroy the Pro League bourgeois. I'm kidding. I've never, ever, 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 ever been a part of this mindset. Most people in my audience are aware. A lot of people are not. And they get surprised often when I tell them, no, that's not what happened when they nerfed your favorite operator. I'm sorry. Let's talk about Siege and Pro League. Why does everybody hate it? Why does Ubisoft keep supporting it? And if everybody hates it, we're going to talk about that. I'm not a fan of the way Pro League is talked about in Rainbow Six, but that's not the purpose of this video. The average Siege player, the casual warrior, doesn't like them. This is prevalent pretty much across the entire FPS gaming industry. Every community seems to have a very similar kind of back and forth. Some games, like Counter-Strike, this argument doesn't really happen. People just kind of, they realize that the competitive scene is integral to the culture of the game, whereas other games that were not built from the ground up, for that particular kind of business model, it gets a lot more contentious. Apex Legends is a good example. The main reason it gets talked about in the context of hero shooters really just has to do with balancing. So people have an idea that updates and patches that influence the game are usually done from the top-down level, usually taking into account high-level play that's often done in the competitive circuit. And so sometimes you will have popular operators that will be nerfed that don't necessarily have those qualities that people find egregious played out in casual. And it's a solution that seems a little bit heavy-handed to these people. They feel like my environment that I was in never had this issue. And so for 1% of people who were having this issue, they get to, have their problem remedied, but then I lose out on my fun in this environment where this was never happening in the first place. So casual players feel like their favorite operators that they had fun playing end up becoming less effective because of balancing, and it ends up shifting around Pro League strategy. However, the problem is that this assessment is not a one-size-fits-all. So sometimes there are situations where something will be made light in Pro League, and then that will eventually result in a nerf or a buff. The issue, of course, is that the casual environment of the game also represents a small portion of the player base. When you are talking about just complete, total, no stakes involved, everybody just kind of running around, doing their own thing, not really thinking about it, the vast majority of people don't actually play the game that way either. They usually play somewhere kind of in the middle. A little bit of sweat, a little bit of fun, right? A healthy mix of competitive focus that's not over the top to the point where it ruins the experience for you. And the issue oftentimes is that the balancing does not get felt until you point it out. So for instance, back in 2020, a really contentious topic was Goyo. Goyo used to have his fire bombs attached to a deployable shield, if you can believe it. He had 4 of them. They lasted a pretty long time, and he could put them throughout the map, wherever he wanted. 4 of those things allowed him to pretty much just lock down a room completely and totally by himself for an extended period of time. Not to mention, there was the confusing factor of the deployable shield, being mixed up potentially with the Goyo bomb. So that, you needed utility to get rid of it, and he had a ton of them anyway. So even if you did go through a process of getting rid of the utility, you could run into Jaeger ADSs, eventually you could run into Wamai, and it was a huge pain in the ass. So regardless of how the effect was felt in a casual environment, the higher up you got in the elo chain, right, the higher skill level you acquired, the more prominent those issues became. So if new players came to the game and they were familiar with it in this kind of way, and eventually they got better and they put themselves in more competitive environments, then they would eventually see those problems anyway. So it's not like everybody is affected by the change all at once. People will often encounter aspects of the balancing later on in their life cycle, like with their relationship with the game. Not every change is done specifically around Pro League, but because there are a number of changes that are done for the professional scene, it gets this reputation that it's like this secret, underground sort of meeting in the minds in black hoods lit by candles, where they get the devs and they go, yes, you will nerf the R4C. And it's not like that. A lot of the time, these changes are often unpopular with the professional players. A lot of the time, the professional players have something to say to Ubisoft quite directly. A really good example of this was when Pengu was very vocal very upfront about Buck losing his frag grenades. He was very unhappy about that particular change. In the patch notes at the time, Ubisoft talked about how Buck and Sledge were, variations of the same operator. And Pengu pointed out that's wrong. That's wrong. Buck can go below and work vertical. Sledge can't do that. Sledge is needed for castle barricades. Buck is not a castle counter. So a lot of the time, professional players can actually, and they have done this in the past, they have countered Ubisoft's behaviors. They've countered Ubisoft's decision-making and openly stated, I disagree with it. Another good example, Solus, relatively recently. I think everybody agrees if Solus had just, lost the ability to use her scanner in the prep phase, that probably would have been an easy fix to get around the problem and would have mitigated a lot of the issues. That was really the big thing, was that she was able to get that cutoff on the initial info just going into the building as soon as possible. Well, now Solus can't play off of her impacts anymore because she doesn't have them, and her verticality, right, to deny diffuse isn't nearly as powerful as it used to be. Now she's, pretty much relegated to using the shotgun for those vertical plays, being able to make plays through destructive environments, and she's lost that gameplay loop entirely. Plenty of professional players were not happy about that change. They said that the change was way too hard, but because it was done after observations of the problem in a professional environment, the professionals, right, the players, get blamed for it. So the problem is not that black and white, yet people are still unhappy about it in certain respects. Another thing people don't like is pick and ban. Now, when pick and ban first got added to the game, some people were not happy about it. By now, nobody really cares. It's been part of the game for so long that people are just, it is what it is. It's just an integral part of the ranked experience in particular. But some people, they think it's lame that they can't play their favorite operators. Fun operators, tend to be operators that are banned frequently, right? Because they're powerful. And using powerful operators is fun because they're powerful. Duh. Some people appreciate the strategic depth that pick and ban provides, but a lot of people, right, they feel like it makes the game overly complicated and it adds downtime that could otherwise be spent in the game actually playing Siege. Some operators, for a pretty significant period of time, were pretty much just locked off from everybody being able to play pretty much ever because they were so integral to the meta at the time. Thatcher, I remember, pretty much had an 80% ban rate, even with Callie in the game, who was supposed to be a Thatcher alternative, and I guess in a sense, that was just, there was no point in being a Thatcher main. There was a pretty significant period of time where you could not open the wall directly. You had to, go through the motions of trying to get the vertical from below with the frag grenades or maybe a buck, right? Alternate options. Maverick. That's why Maverick was so powerful. Maverick was pretty much the wall opening guy. Now you don't really see that anymore. You don't really see Maverick as a wall opening kind of operator. Now he's kind of more of a tertiary supplementary role in some respect. That being said, at the same time, the pick and ban system and the data that they were looking at, right, the actual charts, ended up persuading Ubisoft to add more options. We've had the secondary EMPs added relatively recently. Another operator I never thought I would see, more than like one time maybe, assuming that they didn't get banned, was Mira. Mira was pretty much used every single freaking round because in the utility simulator of 2020, she was just she made a bunker. You had a Jaeger, you had shields. She was the last line of defense. She was the final boss. She was the raid boss of the defense. Now that's not really the case. Now, a little bit more balanced. She has counters. You can get it with Callie, Ash, Twitch drones, right? There's a lot of different ways to deal with it, but she's still really powerful. I like that more, but a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people were unhappy about the Ash and Callie chain. As it turns out, Ash and Callie have not killed Mira. They have not relegated her to the bottom of the pick rate chart, as is a lot of things with Siege. People usually just get mad because my favorite character has a counter now. Wah, wah, wah. Something else people don't like about Pro League has to do with maps. Some people feel like maps are fidgeted around with too much in order to make them competitively viable. One example of this was House. I'm not really sure why House got reworked. That was a very bizarre decision. To this day, I'm not really sure what was going on there. You basically had the Dust 2 of Siege. You had an iconic map that was pretty much what Siege was. Everybody knew that it was a bad map, but it was representative of what, it just had sauce, right? It's hard to describe. You can't really quantify it, but it was just what Siege was. It was a default map that had a lot of interesting aspects to it. And it was just fun. It was a small TDM kind of gunfest sort of thing. And it was representative of what people, wanted the Siege gameplay loop to be like. And then it got, extended and basically, drawn out and made into this, modern Siege kind of like thing. And yeah, it has, more moving parts to it, and that's kind of interesting in some respects, but that's not what people, liked about the map. So it was a matter of target audience in that particular sense. Even though it wasn't balanced for competitive, a lot of people look at changes like that, and then they say, this is why, the professional part of the game is really ruining it, because they feel like everything has to be perfect, and some things are just okay. They're allowed to be bad as long as they're fun. And to a certain degree, when it comes to maps, I kind of sympathize with that, more so than the operator stuff. Another good example of this was Hereford Base. The original Hereford Base was a genuinely fun map. Was it balanced? No, but it was simple. It had a simple layout. It was a boxy map with 3 floors. There was 1 staircase at the end. There was another staircase outside on the other side. And, it made sense, right? There were aspects to it that were not exactly great, but it was fun to play. And it was tight. It was constrained. And, it was another gunfighty kind of map. But then the more recent Hereford Base is infinitely more complex than the previous one. It's very maze-like. It doesn't have a particularly logical flow to it. It's just a weird amalgamated mess. And that map never ended up doing what Ubisoft intended to do with it, I imagine, which was to make it into a, competitively viable ranked map. That map got banned more, I think, than pretty much any ranked map when it was in the pool. And it took forever for that change to happen, right? To take it out of the ranked pool. So a lot of the time we get maps that are reworked, and then sometimes those reworks don't turn out very well. At the same time, Ubisoft's ratio on reworking maps is phenomenally better. And if you look at it in the long term, if you look at Oregon, Cafe, number of different maps that were reworked, Consulate relatively recently, the ratio on actually reworking maps and making them into competitively viable environments that stand the test of time is infinitely better than the examples like Hereford. But a lot of people do cite those as examples of why they don't like professional Siege. Another main point, and I think this is really the biggest overlapping issue with competitive play in pretty much any FPS game, and it really doesn't have anything to do with specific game design, like balancing, characters, guns, right, what have you, the mechanics, what the players interface with gameplay-wise. People have an idea that professional play is toxic, and they feel like the culture and the elitism seeps into the cracks, and it makes the environment less sociable. It makes it more of a pain in the ass to play. It makes it punishing of mistakes. It's easy to get ridiculed, and it just makes the environment, the community, unpleasant to be around. Now, this argument I can understand. I think that there are ways to get around this. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, if you are playing a competitive shooter, you have to understand that you're going to run into people that are going to be assholes, that are going to be toxic, that they're going to, project their issues about the way the round played out on you. People are going to point out stats. People are going to fixate on things that don't make any sense. People are going to ignore strategic aspects of the game and just focus on getting your gun up, and then, posture and try to, I call them e-jocks. This is a term that I came up with a long time ago. The gamer e-jock, right? The e-jock that thinks that I'm not a nerd because I'm playing an e-sport. I'm playing a video game, but it's not like, I'm not a nerd playing like Star Citizen or something. This is a sport. I'm a real man. I'm a cool guy. Yeah, e-jocks are really one of the most annoying tech trees of guy on the internet. I get it. It's super, super frustrating to deal with them. I just mute them. I used to argue with them. I don't anymore. As soon as somebody has something smart to say or they're rude, I just mute them. I don't even care, potentially if they had good comms to say later on. I don't give a shit, right? As soon as they're rude, and I don't mean rude in the sense of like, you made a play and they're like, dude, I don't know if that was a good idea, right? I mean, just genuinely rude, just like genuinely abrasive and frustrating to be around. I instantly mute them, because you're going to get distracted by dealing with their bullshit, and it's going to impact the round. So that's a strategic decision that you're going to make to alleviate your mental, right? Free up that mental bandwidth and focus on the game. Some people don't do that. Some people have a harder time doing that because this is a game. Why are we dealing with this shit? I'm supposed to be having fun doing this. Why am I arguing with a 16-year-old? It's an understandable complaint. I understand why, people don't like it. What happens with a lot of this stuff is that you get young guys who don't really, same thing as the jock who doesn't really pay attention in class, right? They feel like they can contribute to the world, they can contribute, you know, to society with their physical acumen, with their physical prowess. They might, you know, look down on academic things and see them as base, or, you know, it's the typical like nerd versus jock kind of stereotype. We're sort of seeing a new version of that with the advent and the popularity and the marketing penetration of esports. And it creates a really, really strong clash because nerds who played video games, right? Let's be honest, for a long time, video games were not mainstream. Nerds who felt like this space was theirs, they see the jock invading their space and they're like, dude, this was supposed to be mine. This was my thing. And now you're here. Life's a beach and you're here, dude. My sinuses are messed up today, so no matter how much water I drink, I'm gonna sound scratchy. Usually back, you know, a long time ago, especially in the Xbox 360 era of the John Gun Guy games, Halo 3, great example. You had the professional scene that kind of existed unto itself. You could play ranked if you wanted to. There were social, you know, more laid back playlists. You could do custom games. So each of the communities, water, Bud Light. Each of the communities kind of existed unto themselves and they didn't really bug each other. And now, you know, you have games that are essentially made around their professional play, around the idea that they are a competitive experience. Counter-Strike, great example. Valorant, obviously a great example. Siege, you know, directly being a 5v5 plant the bomb to win sort of game, has an awkward relationship with this topic because even though it has heritage with Counter-Strike, it also has heritage with Tom Clancy, the brand, which was more associated with like boomer, you know, dad shooters. And dad shooters, you know, had a harder time kind of, you know, mix mashing that sort of kind of competitive environment. Now, a lot of the guys, you know, that are angry about Pro League will try to gaslight people into saying, oh yeah, you know, back before esports slop, which is a term that I throw around a lot because it's, you know, one of the more, they think it's like a really powerful gotcha argument because it sounds so crass and esports slop. But it's like, it really just makes them it makes them sound like they're putting a ton of emotional investment in the argument where it's not really appropriate. One counter argument to Rainbow Six as a brand is, you know, back in my day, Rainbow Six Vegas was a John Gun Guy before the E teams. And it was a real man's game. And that wasn't true either, because those same exact kinds of guys back then were pissed off about how it was a Gears of War clone. And they said that it was, you know, watered down for the esports stuff because they were trying to get promotional stuff with MLG. Because Gears of War had a massive MLG scene, right? Third-person shooters were in that kind of market. So again, you know, this idea that this is a new argument, it's not. This has been going on for a really long time. It's just, you know, gotten more market penetration because of algorithmic entertainment. And especially the negativity that surrounds the gaming scene and algorithmic entertainment. People don't want to hear arguments, right? They just want to hear themselves be validated. They want the content creator to parrot what they already think. Also, an example, sometimes corporate morons will make terrible business decisions where they will try to push competitive esports focus into an environment where it doesn't belong. A good example of this was Battlefield 5. They tried to do like squad-based gameplay for a bit, and that was a massive disaster. Nobody wanted anything to do with, you know, a more, you know, 5v5-ish. It wasn't exactly 5v5. I forget the details of it, but the point is that it wasn't Battlefield, right? It wasn't like massive team versus team on a big scale, with, you know, wide sweeping combat over vast vistas with vehicles, class-based gameplay, right? That was not an appropriate fit because the target audience was not there. So a lot of people in these communities, right, they see examples like that and they go, well, yeah, this is, you know, emblematic of what's wrong with the entire industry. And they ignore that a lot of the reasons that these corporate, you know, guys, they go for these target audiences is because sometimes that target audience is there, but they don't have really good accuracy, right, with their market targeting. And so when they make shots and misses, that ends up, you know, supposedly being an example of the entire industry and why the entire thing is bad. Ignoring that Counter-Strike, of course, is a worldwide sensation that takes in millions and millions of dollars every single year, sells out massive buildings. DreamHack, right? DreamHack in Dallas every year. Counter-Strike basically just, you know, they have IEM. They take up the entire other half of the building. And that's a big building. I've been to that building. It's, you know, it's the size of a couple of football fields. So you have what the product is interacted with in person and then online. And online, there's a very strong us versus them mentality, and people feel like their voice is not heard by the devs a lot of the time. They feel like they are not being listened to, that they are a marketing oversight in terms of something that's a shinier object that is supposedly making them more money. Now, again, a lot of the time, it isn't as black and white as this, but with Siege, this is a prevalent argument. So it really is, you know, I made a class joke at the beginning, but it does feel like that. It does feel like there's sort of like a weird gamer populism going on, and that's where a lot of the arguments seem to be motivated from, at least in my estimation. Like I said, professional gaming has been a thing for a long time. It's always started out, mind you, as a grassroots thing, weekend warriors, people with day jobs that took it up as a hobby and just, you know, tried to let her rip. It's something that happens in a lot of sporting environments. It happens with racing, particularly, you know, American motorsport have that kind of tradition. Stock car racing grew out of that tradition of, you know, GIs who came back from the war, had day jobs, and on the weekend, they picked up, you know, other crazy hobbies that got their adrenaline pumping, like racing. So this desire, right, this desire to take something that some people find rudimentary, right, that they may find kind of basic, and make it into something else is not uncommon. But for some reason, people, you know, have this problem with something that is competitive and then making it into something that is, you know, much more consolidated and professional. In no other market does this happen. In no other environment, hobby, whatever, does this happen. People, you know, they see somebody taking something and making it into something competitive and they go, oh, okay, well, I don't have to participate in that if I don't want to. People have this idea that you can't do that with gaming because the balancing overall has ruined my experience. Well, I got news for you. They're in the 1% of the player base, right? The professional guys. So in a lot of ways, I think it's more of a sociology thing. I think it's an internet sort of, you know, message amplification thing. People feel like there are more of them. People feel like their voice is much more numerous than they actually think it is. A lot of examples of that happening on the internet lately. Just look up the election cycle coming around. And people who have no clue what is going on are also in the 1% of the player base. Siege is a complex game that has diehards, that has committed audience members that have been playing for a long time. And the vast majority of people noticed when Goyo had 4 firebombs that were shields that you had to deal with tons of utility. Most people noticed that. The people who didn't notice were in the minority, not the other way around. Do notice when Goyo has 4 deployable shield firebombs. Most people notice that. Most people look at that and go, wow, this is a giant pain in the ass to deal with. So people have this idea that their, you know, their democracy, right? Their casual democracy is much larger than it is, and it's not. But you know, the internet amplifies particular opinions, and people have the idea that there are more of them than there are. So is it Pro League? Is it casuals? I don't think the game should be made for either of these particular audiences, one or the other. I think that Siege is at its best when it takes a holistic approach that incorporates a number of different opinions and then does things on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, that's what they usually do, actually. It's just that the audience disagrees with the specifics of the changes. Ubisoft does balance for a wide range of opinions. It's just that we don't necessarily agree with them all the time. And that's okay, because they're big boys and big girls. And, you know, they can take it. We're all adults here. Now, a lot of people on the internet don't act like it, but that shouldn't take away from it. What do you guys think about the casual versus esports war that's been going on in Siege since the game freaking came out almost 10 years ago? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video tomorrow. Deuces.